In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, good evening, friends, and welcome to the 65th episode of Crime and Punishment, a legal podcast, not a political one. The official podcast of the Invictus Law Firm, PA, a criminal defense law firm in Orlando, Florida, the website for which is augustusinvictus.com. We're going to talk about the news tonight. I'm doing a special Saturday night edition because what else are we going to do? Watch Peaky Blinders? It's been a few weeks, actually, since we've had this program. That's how law practice goes, as you may know. We've just lost the live chat here, so let me reopen this. What I'm going to do, since it's been a while since we've had the program, let's please stop that. What I'm going to do, since it's been a while since we've had the program, is obnoxious. All right, so as I was saying, since it's been a while since we had the program, what I'm going to do is go through the Twitter feed. I think that would be the most constructive way to go through all these articles. How about that? If you're watching, tell your friends. Tell them to go like this. Tell them to share this. Gotta get these numbers up. Oh, announcement, speaking of which. Number one, I got a bunch of friend requests today on Facebook. I never check Facebook. I quite frankly never check any social media. Certainly not the messaging systems. So please, if you are listening to this, do not write me on social media. I get so many spam messages, so many. I don't read social media messages. Plus, as I hope everyone has seen from these Twitter files coming out, like I've been saying for years, social media messaging is not private. You have absolutely no expectation of privacy in social media messages. They're not encrypted, and as the Twitter files show, they can be read by the people in the company, and they are read by the people in the company. So stop sending messages there, especially if they are illegal nature. You might also have seen, and we might talk about this today because this happened since last we had the show, the Oath Keepers case. They actually, allegedly, I wasn't at the trial, but from what I understand of the trial, they actually had messages from Facebook talking about guns in a hotel room and do we go get them. Talking about that on Facebook Messenger is just begging to go to prison. Don't write things about your legal cases. Don't ask questions to me or to any other lawyer through social media, for the love of God. Write me my email address, invictuspa@protonmail.com. Write me there if you got a legal question. Do not do it on social media, please. Not just because you're putting yourself at risk, but which is the primary concern, but also because I don't read them. I won't get them for another 8 months, and by then, your pickle's probably over. Or you're in a much worse pickle. So please write me at the law firm's email address, invictuspa@protonmail.com. Second announcement, and the reason we're doing this party tonight, I'm going to move to a new format. We've been at a ceiling of about 500 views per episode of this program for a year and a half, going on 2 years now. In February, it will be 2 years. So we've been doing Crime and Punishment, and we cannot get over 5,000 views. 500 views. I wish we had 5,000. My fault. I just keep doing it as content creation. I don't do it to run it as a business. I don't do anything to improve it. So what I'm going to do is take a page from Styx and start doing shorter videos. Maybe continue with this hour-long program once a week, but do shorter videos that are just talking about one news article. No intro and outro music, none of the rigmarole. Just go in, talk about a news article that's come out for that day, come right back out. It'll be more timely, be more time efficient for all of us, that is. anyone from 6th is asking, you've probably been asked this before, but what happened to Tiger. When we started this program, Tiger was either a law student or he was recently graduated from law school. I don't recall. That was a lifetime ago. Anyway, in the meantime, he's begun his own law practice. So he has like actual work to do. He's also had a child. So he's got serious, legit fatherhood duties. So now he's, he's big boy out of his nest on his own, being a father, being an attorney, running his own law practice. God bless him. So yeah, he just can't. I don't have the time for this, and this is my own program. So he certainly doesn't have time for it. So Brian says, good evening from the West. Good evening from the East, Brian. Always good to see you, brother. Seth, I don't know what that emoji means, but good to see you, man. Justin says, welcome back, brother. Been missing you lately. Yep. Sorry about that. Sorry, Justin. I've been in the same boat as Tiger. Fatherhood and law practice. It is very time consuming. Really gets in the way of podcasting. Which, I won't get into my thoughts on professional podcasters, but anyway. Heck yeah, Augustus, it's been a while, says Triple G. Word up, Triple G. So those are the two announcements. Do not write to social media. Write to the law firm's email address, invictuspa@protonmail.com. And we're going to move to a new format because Styx has clearly got it figured out. And I think it will keep things more up to date. It'll get you news analysis on the law a lot faster. And I can just do my work throughout the day, say, hey, let's take 10 minutes to talk about this article, and go back to my work. Because you would not believe. I was actually talking to somebody. Who was it yesterday? It's a college student. Oh, no, it was at jiu-jitsu. Yeah, a college student talking about how much work he has. I'm like, brother, I used to think the same thing when I was in college, and then I got to law school. And then I used to think the same thing when I was in law school, and then I started practicing law. You have no idea how much time you have on your hands until you become a lawyer. And then it's just, you remember the glory days of, having free time, traveling, going to concerts, going to the symphony, watching movies. That doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, let's talk about the first article we want to talk about. Well, that I want to talk about anyway. I don't know about you guys. This is the legal implications. This is a Time magazine article, believe it or not. I know it'll be shocking. The legal implications of the debate over whether extreme racism is a mental illness. I also saw something about misgendering people and insisting on misgendering people and refusing to call them by their chosen pronouns. That too is a mental illness, which leads one to the rational question, where do we pick up our disability checks? Inquiring minds want to know. But here's the pickle. When they do this, when they say extreme racism is a mental illness, well, we already saw steps A through M in the alphabet, right? Let's do these red flag laws. We're going to say, you know what? In the case of an emergency, we don't need to bother with the Constitution. We'll make it a temporary injunction, a temporary restraining order. We'll force them to give up their guns temporarily until they can attend a hearing, and then their constitutional rights will, of course, be protected. They'll have the right to defend themselves. They'll have the right to present evidence, to call witnesses. But, of course, none of that really matters. It's not the same standard, same burden of proof. You're not entitled to a lawyer. They have I won't call them kangaroo courts. They're not ad hoc courts. They are established courts. However, they have these procedures, let's say, that are quite dubious. When you say, all right, we're going to have somebody in the neighborhood call the cops. Say, my neighbor's mentally ill. He's got a gun. I know he has a gun in his house. I've been there before. What can you do about this? I think he's a danger. Well, Second Amendment goes right out the window. You don't have a Second Amendment right anymore. If your neighbor calls and says you're mentally ill, God help you if you have a history of mental illness, and God help you, because no one else will, if you tell the cops that you are suicidal or depressed, or that you have ever been treated for mental illness, whatever you say, they're going to take your guns. And there's nothing the Second Amendment or James Madison or George Washington is going to do about it. These are the red flag laws. And we have seen them work in real time. And we've seen them used against white nationalists, against right-wingers. They say, that guy is insane, he's mentally ill, or he's a danger to the community. Cops come in, take the guns, they set a hearing. And of course, you are predestined to lose that hearing. Now, it used to be, well, I guess it still is to this day, that, well, we're not judging you on your politics. Of course, God forbid. We would never try to say that your political views are the reason that we took your firearms. God, no. No, God forbid. What we're saying is your associations with people we've labeled terrorists because of their political beliefs. That's why we're taking your guns. Not because of your political beliefs or any ideology that you hold, but because of the dangerous people that you know. And by the way, we think that you're unstable, not least of all because you know these people and, by the way, hold the same political ideologies of them. But it's absolutely not about your political ideology. It's about you being a danger to the community. That's what this is about. Well, now there's a debate over whether extreme racism is a mental illness. Now, if extreme racism is a mental illness, and a red flag law says that they can take your firearms if you are mentally ill and a danger to others, you've just made it. It's a logical syllogism. Extreme racism means you get your firearms taken because you are a danger to others and you are mentally ill and you cannot be trusted with those firearms. Of course, you'll be granted a hearing and your due process rights will be protected. You'll be able to present evidence in your defense and you'll be able to cross-examine the witnesses and even call witnesses of your own. Have a great time, buddy. Have a great time at that hearing. But we're keeping your guns because you're an extreme racist. That's the debate going on right now. We probably should have read the article before talking about that, huh? Everyone knows that Law and Order plot lines are often, as they say, ripped from the headlines. But Dr. Alvin Poussin, 88, knows this on another level. An emeritus professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. What a pedigree. He has had the unusual experience of seeing his ideas incorporated into a season 12 episode of the long-running show. In it, a white working stiff murders a black CEO in a dispute over a New York City taxicab. Totally legit storyline. When the trial begins, a respected black psychiatrist takes the stand to present his idea that the defendant suffers from extreme racism, a mental illness. His lawyers argue that extreme racism has such a complete hold on the defendant that it mitigates their client's responsibility for the murder. In the final moments, the audience is encouraged to feel that it's a victory for justice, for law and order, when the jury rejects the psychiatrist's ideas, Poussin tells me with a tinge of disdain. In the real world, Poussin was that psychiatrist. Sort of. So, let's put a pin in that and have a little legal lesson here. So when you claim the insanity defense, what you're claiming is, I didn't know right from wrong at the time. I was divorced from reality at the time. I can't be held culpable, right? Can't be held morally or legally culpable. I can't be convicted because I was insane at that time. So what they're saying is in this show, which I don't watch Law and Order, you shouldn't either, by the way. Stop watching that garbage. What they're saying is they're trying to use this as kind of an insanity defense. He's so mentally ill because he's such an extreme racist that he can't be held culpable for the crime. And of course, the jury rejects that, says, no, hang him, crucify that white supremacist, and the audience rejoices, right? So that's what they mean in that opening salvo. To continue, while he never brought his ideas to the witness stand inside the New York City courthouse behind those massive stone steps that Law and Order made famous, in 1999 he shared his theories on the link between mental health and extreme forms of bigotry on the op-ed pages of the New York Times. In doing so, he helped set off a debate that ended with the American psychiatric establishment publicly rejecting the concept, partly on the grounds that so many people are racists. But even now, after nearly a decade during which the number of hate crimes has steadily increased, the question of the relationship between bigotry and mental illness has never been fully resolved. In fact, recent high-profile incidents have made public perception of that dynamic perhaps as muddled as ever. The issue comes up in relation to everything from major mass shootings to pop culture discourse. The racist attack at Buffalo, New York's supermarket, for which the gunman pleaded guilty this week to this is again a couple weeks ago, to state murder and domestic terrorism charges, prompted calls for the country to get serious about mental health, as well as pleas not to talk about the shooting as a matter of psychiatric illness rather than a racist hate crime. Interesting spin. Because every time the corporate media comes out about a mass shooting, it's always, that person's a white supremacist. That person's a white supremacist. He hates minority X, whoever was present there. He hates everybody but white people. Every single time it's a white person, they are ipso facto a white supremacist. And every single time it's a Holmes or a Cruz or just fill in the blank, of course they're white. They look white enough. And every single time it's not someone who looks white enough, well, that doesn't make the news, does it? The defense every single time to the charge of white supremacy, white supremacist terrorism, etc., is that person is clearly mentally ill. Forget the racial issue. This has nothing to do with politics. Is Holmes white? Is he Jewish? Who knows? Is Cruz Hispanic or Anglo white enough? Whatever. Who cares? The point is, they clearly have mental illness issues. This has nothing to do with politics. They are not representing the quote-unquote white supremacist community, right? The media wants it to be that way. The defense is always, they're on psychotropic medication. They have serious problems. What are you doing? This has nothing to do with this narrative you're pushing. Well, now they're saying, well, yes, it does, because after all, racists are mentally ill. And if you are a racist, you are extremist. And by the way, let's not forget, only white people can be racist, because racism is institutionalized. And if you don't have institutional power, which of course blacks don't, even though they had Obama, you can't be racist. Only white people can be racist. Jewish people can't be, because they clearly don't have any institutional power. Only white people can be racist. Ergo, only white people can be extreme racists. Ergo, only white people can be extreme racists who are ipso facto mentally ill. And ergo, only racist white people, which is all white people, of course, as we know, can have their guns taken away and forget about the Second Amendment. It's out the window. That's where this train leads, ladies and gentlemen. That's where we are going. You got this whole sideshow, this whole smoke and mirrors about the NRA protecting rights, and we're going to fight with the Republicans. They're going to get our Second Amendment rights and blah, 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 blah. Black rifle companies supporting Rittenhouse or not, or whatever. It's all academic after they pass red flag laws and racism is a mental illness. Kind of like, freedom of speech, right? Yeah, Constitution says federal government cannot limit your freedom of speech. Pretty black and white. There's a lot of case law on it for like 200 years. However, Twitter's not the government. Twitter's a private company. Facebook's a private company. Meta's a private company. They can all limit your free speech because the Constitution doesn't apply to them. That's how the freedom of speech, the First Amendment freedom of speech, was made completely obsolete. Because big government, federal government, they don't have to lift a finger to silence you. They'll let PayPal do it. Stripe, Merchant Services, Chase, Manhattan, Bank of America, they will silence you, and there's nothing you can do about it because the Constitution doesn't apply to them. Now, of course, the Twitter files are coming out showing actually the FBI and DHS were directing Twitter policy for years, which, of course, we knew since Charlottesville. But what are you going to do about that? You don't have standing to sue. Even if you did, who are you going to sue? An intelligence agency? For doing can the estate of Malcolm X sue the FBI? Come on, there's nothing you can do. What, are you gonna vote them out? Good luck. It's hard to distinguish what psychiatric experts have decided not to define, to separate what Poussin calls everyday racism, covering the span from systemic discrimination to microaggressions, from the extreme version, which he and others have described as the point at which bigotry so deeply shapes behavior that a person struggles to function and sometimes becomes dangerous. But the question is more than just a thought experiment. If extreme racism were to become accepted as a mental illness per se, more suspects in hate crime cases could potentially have recourse to mount insanity defenses in court. There's the double-edged sword. And given all the mass shootings and disturbing public events in which extreme racism appears to have played some part since Poussin first described his ideas, it's also hard not to wonder. Might developing a research-backed extreme racism diagnosis and sound treatments have saved lives? Whew. I love it. Have you ever seen A Clockwork Orange? Not that I'm promoting that degeneracy, but the program that they use to quote-unquote cure Alex, that's what we're talking about. You hear about Soviet re-education camps. Well, you've probably heard more about Nazi re-education camps because, after all, Nazis and communists are the same thing, if you're a Republican. But this is what we're getting to here. Listen to this last line. Might developing a research-backed extreme racism diagnosis and sound treatments have saved lives? Let's translate that. If we had diagnosed this person in Buffalo, New York, as an extreme racist a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, if we knew that he supported J6 and Trump, if we knew that he was at Charlottesville, if we knew he was a member of whatever group I'm not going to name, if we knew this and we had caught it earlier, if his family had only known and had taken him to the psychiatrist, if they were diagnosed with extreme racism and underwent sound treatment, would that have saved lives in Buffalo, New York? How terrifying is that? What is a sound treatment for extreme racism? I shudder to think. I don't even want to theorize on that. I'm sure there are just loads of people doing that theorizing, though. They are just waiting for the moment. Let's continue with the article. Though the FBI typically releases data each fall detailing the prior year's hate crime statistics, the agency has not yet done so in 2022. But social conditions are rife, experts say, for the increase to continue. You know, those are the same FBI statistics where they document white on black crime, black on white crime, white on black rapes, and black on white rapes. And I'm wondering if this writer for Time magazine has ever actually looked at the FBI statistics that are released every single year. Or whether he's relying on these experts that say this increase in hate crimes are to continue. And let's not forget the number one rule of statistics, that 83% of statistics are pulled right out of a hat. Hate crimes are not increasing because hate crimes are increasing. Hate crimes are increasing because everything is a hate crime. Things are being recategorized as hate crime. Enhancements are being added every single year. Every state legislator is adding more things as hate crimes, adding more enhancements for hate crimes. Of course, statistically, the number of hate crimes are going to go up when you have an infinite number of new hate crimes year by year. It's not because the crimes are changing, it's because your categorization of the crimes are changing. Statistics 101, baby. I wish more journalists would take statistics and they would stop with this statistics say X, Y, and Z. 52% by 13%. Like, come on. Statistics are a joke. Everybody knows it. But social conditions are rife, experts say, for the increase to continue. Police have noted that 47 out of 100 people arrested for hate crimes in New York City in early 2022 have prior documentation of an emotionally disturbed person incident. Half the people arrested for hate crimes in New York City were previously considered emotionally disturbed. So the stakes are high for the nation's courtrooms to respond to the trauma unleashed by that dynamic, and for Americans to decide what constitutes a just outcome. I'm sure that it will be Americans deciding that, not the corporate media, the public officials, the judges. No, it won't be them. It will be the American people that decide this, like we decide everything else that happens in this country. It's complicated, says Sander Gilman, an historian at Emory University who researches the relationship between health, science, law, and society, and who has long taught a course on extremism. But I'm going to start with two things that I call Gilman's Law. Amazing that this Emory University professor named this law after herself. You can't do that. Other people name it after you, lady. But she calls it Gilman's Law. Not all racists are crazy, but crazy people can be racists. Profound. Thanks in part to the influence of pop culture, not least those TV police procedurals, many assume that insanity pleas are common. In reality, mental health defenses are rare, and even more rarely lead to reduced punishment. Mounting that kind of defense requires time and significant resources to gather evidence and expert testimony, so in practice, it is not an avenue available to all defendants. I will say, I've had one, maybe two cases in my entire career where I could genuinely plead the insanity defense. We ended up not doing it for reasons I won't get into. Unfortunately, that man is deceased now. I am still upset about that and lose sleep about that. But that one particular case where we actually had an insanity defense, we ended up not doing it. We got a better outcome otherwise, but it is so rare. I've literally never used it, never seen it. It happens, but this whole thing on TV where everybody's claiming the insanity defense is just not reality. Believe it or not, what you're seeing on TV is not real. In England and the US, courts began to reliably consider the mental health of defendants only in the 19th century. The McNaughton Rule, a standard for determining a defendant's sanity at the time of crime, was established in 1840s England. It holds that only the sane can be held responsible for their actions. As a result, the question of mental fitness, sufficient sanity to participate meaningfully in one's own defense, is sometimes evaluated before a trial. Whether the state has an obligation or right to treat such an illness in order for the person to then stand trial is, Gilman says, a question that goes back as far as the idea of such a defense. I'll actually take it one step further than the McNaughton rule. There's an ancient, and by ancient I mean it's in Latin. We all used to use Latin before, the 60s. There's an ancient legal maxim that says madness is its own punishment. So what they're saying about the McNaughton rule is that only the sane can be responsible for their actions. That's basically what we go by today, that if you don't understand reality at the time you committed this crime, then you can't be held morally culpable for having committed the crime. For instance, if you're a paranoid schizophrenic, and you believe that an alien invasion is taking place and you are fighting them off and you're punching aliens in the face because you can't have them taking over your city. Well, and it turns out they're not actually aliens, they're cops. And you are charged with battery on a law enforcement officer. And this is, of course, I've never actually seen this happen. This is more like a thought experiment, but you're charged with battery on a law enforcement officer. You can claim, if it's true, of course, I'm sorry, I thought they were aliens. I didn't understand reality at the time. Now I'm back on my medication, and I know that these law enforcement officers were not aliens, and I'm very sorry for this misunderstanding. Well, you can't be held morally culpable in that situation, right? Once a competency decision has been made, the accused who do go to trial have the right to a defense. In some cases, that may include an option for a jury to find the defendant not guilty by reason of mental disorder. In others, ideas about the mental health of the defendant may more informally shape what evidence is presented. So what they're saying is they would have to rehabilitate you, put you back on your medication, make sure you are sane before you can even stand trial, before you can even go forward with charges against the person, to make sure that they understand reality now. Okay, now that you're back on your medication, do you understand who the judge is? What does the judge do? Do you understand who your lawyer is and what your lawyer's role is? Do you understand what the prosecutor's role is? Do you understand what the jury does? Do you understand the allegations against you? Do you understand the facts that are presented in this case, or at least alleged in this case? And if you get through all of that and they clearly do understand now that they're back on their medication, okay, well, now you are competent to proceed to trial. So that's the procedure they're talking about. But so-called mental disease or defect defenses are used in only about 1% of cases, says Michael Bukai, a professor at the State University of New York at Buffalo School of Law, and an expert on mental health and other social issues in courtrooms. Those defenses are successful in even fewer cases. In fact, such a tactic often backfires or results in a defendant confined for a longer term inside a hospital than that person would have spent in prison, sometimes with no end date. And even rarer, though not unheard of, is an attempt to use racism or other bigotry as an indicator of mental health challenges, he says. So that is something that will really shoot you in the foot, that people don't think about when they're pretending to be insane, right? They think there's a massive public misconception about this. They think, well, if I'm insane, if I prove or convince rather to the jury that if I convince the jury that I'm crazy and I didn't know reality at the time, well, then I walk. I just go home, go to the store, buy a 40, smoke a blunt, and I'm off the hook. All I gotta do is pretend I'm crazy. Negative. That is not the case. If you plead insanity, if you are crazy, or if you're determined to be crazy, I should say, you don't go home. You get rehabilitated. And, it's probably in most cases, do not take this, by the way, as legal advice. Disclaimer, this show is for entertainment purposes only. If you have a case or a legal matter or an issue of legal concern you want research, talk to your lawyer. Do not take what I'm saying as legal advice. What I'm saying is, for entertainment purposes only, it might be better to go to prison than to go to a mental hospital. Ask Ezra Pound. You go into a mental hospital, you have no rights anymore. The Constitution doesn't apply to a mental hospital. The Constitution applies to prison. Mental hospital is not subject to the Constitution. Mental hospital is subject to the psychiatrist, the people evaluating you. They don't play by the same rules. Now, it's not to denigrate all psychiatrists that are in the system. There are many psychiatrists. In fact, here in Orlando, I'm very happy to say all the psychiatrists I've dealt with in my criminal cases, they all genuinely have an interest in helping the client and doing the right thing. I've got to say, I've never had a psychiatrist in any of my cases here, screw over my client or say something that was false. So it's not like, it's not like they have nefarious intent, but, there are a lot of cases. And if your treatment is going to take 10 years, your treatment's going to take 10 years. There's no timeline on it. There's no case plan for it. Well, Dr. So-and-so, do you think we can get him rehabilitated in a year and he can go home? Like, no. If he's that crazy that he's so divorced from reality, he can't function in society and can't be held culpable for his crimes, who knows how long it will take to rehabilitate you. Again, in the case of Ezra Pound, it could take 12 years. You're really gambling. And you don't have rules like you do at a prison. Not that COs follow the rules in prison, but a mental health institution, they do whatever they want to you. They drug you. I mean, in prison, you can refuse your medication, and you're going to get out sooner or later. You don't have to take your medication. They can't, strap you down and force feed you medication. But in a hospital, game on. They're going to do whatever they want to do to you to rehabilitate you, to make you better. To me, that's worse than the hell of prison. So maybe something to think about. This notion that, I'm going to plead insanity, I'm going to go home, I would think again on that if I were you. I think it would be extremely hard, says Bukai, extremely hard, to succeed on the theory that extreme racism per se, particularly subscription to a theory, is a mental illness for the purpose of criminal responsibility. Just because you have a psychologist or psychiatrist saying this person is mentally ill does not mean that the law has to accept that. So that's how you dull down that second edge of that double-edged sword, right? We're going to say they're mentally ill so that we can treat them before they go commit an act of violence. We need to re-educate them. We need to cure them. We can take away their firearms. We can give preliminary injunctions. We can restrict their rights, restrict their movements. We can do all these things. But it's not the kind of mental illness where you can claim insanity and you're not morally culpable for something. No, we can take all of your rights and drive you into the ground if you're an extreme racist, but you can't depend on that as a defense. What kind of world do you think this is? Let's go back to the article. There's a parenthesis here after that. Nor does the defendant. Dylan Roof, the white man who shot and killed 9 black worshipers inside a Charleston, South Carolina church in 2015, whose legal team used words like delusional, abnormal, and suicidal to describe their client, rejected advice from his lawyers to attempt to avoid the death penalty by allowing them to argue that he was insane or suffering from a mental defect at the time of the shooting. Common tactic with lawyers. A lot of times it's not. Actually, I'd say almost every situation that I know of, and again, I only know these from academic, from news, from case studies. I actually don't know anybody in real practice who has done this to their client. But I'd say the vast majority of these cases where the lawyers are claiming that the client is insane, they're pressuring their client to take that defense. It wasn't the client's idea. The client is not, or the defendant rather, is not coming to the lawyer saying, hey man, I was crazy when that happened. Let's plead the insanity defense. It's almost always the lawyer. And Dylan Roof's not the only person who the lawyers were trying to press that on and use it as a defense who said, no, I'm not crazy. Ted Kaczynski is probably the most famous, actually, of that genre of defense, right? There's that Discovery show, an 8-part miniseries called Manhunt, and they actually did a brilliant job of laying out what happened with the defense attorneys, forcing him to take a plea. I mean, the deal was, you're going to do this or we're going to do X, Y, and Z. So he did not want to be declared incompetent, did not want to be declared insane, because industrial society in its future would then be the ravings of a madman. He couldn't be found insane, or everything he had done, all of his work, all the publication, everything would have been, oh, that guy was crazy. We don't have to listen to that. Of course, all these years later, I think that was 97. Who was right? Anyway, so that's usually what happens. The lawyers get sick of the guy, which, to be fair, some clients can be annoying. But they get sick of it, they just think this guy really is legitimately insane and we should go with this. And the defendant does not want to do that because, like Dylan Roof or like Ted Kaczynski, it would destroy their entire message. And they're not going to play that game. They're not going to play the lawyer's game and claim that they're mentally ill when they're not. I'm not making a judgment as to whether either of those people are mentally ill or not. I had nothing to do with their mental health evaluations, so I'm not speaking as an expert on that. Some fear that raising mental health issues in court runs the risk of bolstering inaccurate myths about the mentally ill. In reality, mentally ill people are disproportionately more likely to become the victims of crime, and most do nothing to victimize others. This is perhaps the best paragraph so far. We can't say that extreme racism is a mental illness, because that would give a bad name to the mentally ill. God forbid mentally ill people be called racist. That's the worst thing that could happen to them. That's their concern. Not that you're completely trampling on the rights of people who have a different opinion on race than you, but because calling extreme racist mentally ill would give a bad name to mentally ill people. Just wild. And as has been observed after so many headline-making crimes, what a Germanic word, headline-making. It's all one word in this article. And as has been observed after so many headline-making crimes, suspects from privileged groups are more likely to have their actions described as illness in need of treatment instead of criminal evil meriting punishment. Some experts fear that shifting the conversation to questions of mental health can also draw attention away from hateful ideas embraced by the person accused of the crime. Ideas that are today often shared by people, including public figures, whose mental health is not questioned. That's how important social problems that require the nation's attention are transformed into one individual's medical problems, says W. Carson Bird, a sociologist at the University of Michigan. That line of thinking is particularly problematic in a culture prone to dismiss the need for system-wide reforms to address inequality, Bird says. It's like the writer of this article went and just found all the cultural Marxists that they could. Like, what do you think, cultural Marxist number 1? What do you think, cultural Marxist number 2, who's not a sociologist but a psychiatrist? What do you think, social cultural Marxist number 3, who's an engineering professor or whatever you are? Not a very diverse group of people here. But inequality, Bird says. It can foster an emphasis on quick fixes for the world's long-standing problems with bigotry. In 2012, for example, a team of British researchers announced that an existing heart and blood pressure drug appeared to reduce implicit bias after a study involving just 36 subjects. White supremacy is a very normal part of society, says Bird, who is also the faculty director of research initiatives at his university's National Center for Institutional Diversity. It is not a good or productive part of society, he points out, but a deeply entrenched one. One of the detriments of trying to look at racism as a form of psychopathology or mental illness is that it makes that illness abhorrent, as if everything else is working in a certain non-racist way. Research has also long shown that bigotry is not an inborn human trait, but rather is something learned from our environments, Bird says. While racism can influence one's mental health, describing racism itself, even extreme racism as a mental illness implies that bigotry exists beyond our individual and collective control. By medicalizing extreme racism, making it something curable, a mental health disorder, it pulls away from having those broader conversations about how society is impacting people, he says. We just try to figure out, how do we fix this one person? This problem, Bukai notes, can already be clearly seen in discussions about gun crime, and mass shootings in particular. It's very hard to understand these crimes, and the discourse of insanity provides one way to do it, says Bukai. But I think we can see where that sort of language is irresponsible and potentially undermines a just result. In other words, if a mass shooter is simply insane, then wholesale gun law reform can, to some, seem unnecessary, even unwise. When bigotry is involved, that supposed insanity might, some who oppose Poussin's ideas believe, undermine system-wide efforts toward equity, or at least toward greater safety for those most likely to be targeted. So, let's hop off this trolley for a second and talk about that. A certain group of people wants guns banned. Wholesale gun law reform. Of course, they're not saying they want it banned. They just want bump stocks banned. They just want longer magazines banned. They just want this particular type of rifle banned. They just want nitpick, until ultimately, obviously, the entire real goal is ban all guns, except for the police, of course. The police should have guns. But if you say that a mass shooter is insane, and it's not the fault of guns, well, then gun reform isn't really the solution, is it? The solution is a mental health solution. The guy is crazy. And not because he's extremely ill, but because he's got X, Y, and Z problems. He's on psychotropic medications A through M, right? And that has nothing to do with the gun debate. That's a mental health issue. And that every single time it's a racist white person shooting at a Walmart or wherever it is today, every single time it's, we've got to ban guns. We got to ban, and by the way, we got to ban white supremacy. We got to ban white people. White people just keep doing these mass shootings. Well, when you say, no, that person is, first, whatever, whether he's Jewish or white, whatever, that person's mentally ill, then that whole gun question goes out the window. It's not about the gun. It's about the mental illness. Or the CIA handler, whatever the case may be, the FBI handler. So the opponents of this, let's call extreme racism a mental illness, they're saying, well, then we can't push wholesale gun law reform. You can't call these people mentally ill. You can't give them an insanity defense. You can't do any of this because then we can't use them to push wholesale gun law reform. Come on. Get with the program. In 1999, when Poussin wrote his op-ed advocating for increased research into possible psychiatric treatments for extreme racism, he was the author of acclaimed books about the effects of racism on black mental health and a veteran of public controversy in America. Years earlier, he'd argued publicly that racial pride among black Americans could be taken to an unhealthy extreme. By the 1990s, he may have been best known for his work with Bill Cosby, consulting on scripts for The Cosby Show in a massively popular effort to disrupt stereotypes. Poussin first published his ideas about extreme racism weeks after a man named Buford O. Furrow Jr. shot and seriously injured 4 children and an adult inside a Jewish community center in Los Angeles, then shot and killed a nearby Asian American postal worker. When captured and ultimately convicted, Furrow told investigators his actions had been motivated by hate. Reporters unearthed information indicating that Furrow had close relationships with known white nationalists, and also that he had been evaluated by Washington State's mental health system only months before the attack. Put a pin in that. I sincerely doubt that. I sincerely doubt that is true. Relationships with known white nationalists? The experts said that? Reporters said that? I sincerely doubt that. Because the media didn't start using the term white nationalist until the Trump administration, until after the alt-right had gotten Trump elected. That's when the media started using the term white nationalist. Before that, everybody was a white supremacist. Obviously. And this, again, this goes to the entire phenomenon of this dramatic statistical rise in hate crimes. No, there's not. There's a rise in hate crimes because you've made everything a hate crime. You've recategorized everything. Reporters didn't unearth information that Furrow had close relationships with known white nationalists because you weren't calling them white nationalists at that time. You were calling them white supremacists, or you were calling them neo-Nazis. Those were the buzzwords back then. So don't give me that we unearthed this information, everybody's a white nationalist nonsense. He'd even told officials after a previous arrest for assault that he'd fantasized about mass murder. To Poussin, this story signaled a growing threat posed by a failure to recognize that, while highlighting and combating systemic racism is important in preventing discrimination, so is identifying and helping individuals motivated by bigotry who might go so far as to injure or kill others. The idea had been brewing for years. In 1993, a Jamaican immigrant named Colin Ferguson had shot and killed 6 people and injured 19 aboard a New York commuter train after years of personal struggles that he blamed on white and Asian people, whom he referred to as devils. Ferguson had been pinned down by passengers on the train to stop the shooting, but while defending himself at trial, he argued that someone else committed the crime. Ferguson's lawyers had planned to argue that he was insane at the time, suffering from something called black rage, another condition debated but not officially recognized by the American Psychiatric Association, and that was the subject of a Law & Order episode. After the train shootings, Poussin, a Haitian-American son of immigrants, had noted Ferguson's trajectory: racist thinking, delusions that had come to dominate his life, then mass violence. This was a textbook case of extreme racism. And I'll say at this point in the article, I'm actually not arguing that happens. That trajectory, obviously we've seen that time and again. No denying that. Whether as a person in this scene for years or as a lawyer, I mean, it's very clear these things happen. The debate isn't, do people think a certain way, delusions dominate their life, and then they commit an act of violence? That's not the question. That happens with everything. How many Republicans have done that? Not because they're racist thinking, but because that person's a Democrat, right? Anti-Democrat thinking, delusions that had come to dominate his life, and then mass violence. Well, maybe not mass shootings, but you could do that in times of actual terrorism, right? Let's use Tim McVeigh as an example. It's not racist thinking, anti-government thinking, sure. Anti-government thinking, delusions that had come to dominate his life, if you believe they were delusions, and then mass violence, right? This is a textbook case of extreme whatever it is. So it's not about the racism. That's what Poussin wants it to be about. He's a Haitian-American son of immigrants. He's a psychiatrist. That's his thing. And that's not to say anything bad about Haitian-Americans or even, okay, it is something bad about psychiatrists. I really don't like them. But it has nothing to do with race. That is his field. And every person in every field wants this to be their thing, especially if they're an academic. It's a shame that the uninitiate does not understand how the academic mind works. Everybody wants credit. Everybody, that's how you gain honor in an academic institution or the academic world, is that you have this theory and that becomes your thing, right? Everybody's got their thing. Well, his thing is, this is the trajectory. Racist thinking, delusions, mass violence. Every single time. That's why it's racism. It's extreme racism. It's mental illness. He makes speeches about it. He writes articles about it. He makes books about it. That is his field. He's the expert in that field. But taking a step back, if you're not a Haitian American son of immigrants who has gone into psychiatry and this is what you study and this is your profession, then you see that that's actually just human nature. How many Antifa are under that same trajectory? Anti-racist thinking, delusions that come to dominate his life, then mass violence. How many Democrats? How many Muslims? You could go on and on and on. You have this type of thinking, it becomes delusional and dominates their life, and then mass violence or an act of violence. This is not, some modern theory of psychiatry. This is human nature. Look at Ajax, written by Sophocles, right? Comes back from the Trojan War, has this messed up thinking. He's haunted. He has delusions that come to dominate his life, and then he slaughters everybody. His own family, his own household. Nothing to do with racism. That is human nature. Let's continue with this article. Oh, we are so over time. I guess we're not reading any other articles. Might not even finish this one. Goodness gracious. How long have we been going on about this article? I guess there's only a few more paragraphs. Extreme racism crosses the line and is out of control, he explains. Just like somebody can have a little bit of anxiety, but if they have anxiety to the point that it is immobilizing, then it is a mental disorder. Mass shooters behind hate crimes are, as he sees it, in a similar state. They weren't functioning individuals. They were impaired by their mental pathology. Yeah, I am not going to argue with that strongly. When the third edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, the guide that mental health professionals use to make their diagnoses, was published in 1980, clinicians like Poussin considered racism, not extreme racism, but what he calls everyday racism, a potential symptom of several conditions, from paranoid personality disorder to generalized anxiety disorder. So if you are seeing things that don't exist, right? Like if you think that a certain group, a racial group, controls the media or the banks, like that's a symptom of a mental illness. You probably suffer from paranoid personality disorder. Or if you think another group of people is prone to crime and you're in a, restaurant or bar or alley dominated by that certain group of people and you are fearful, say for your life, you probably just suffer from generalized anxiety disorder because your extreme racism is a symptom of your mental illness. And for that, we've got to take your guns. Racism alone is not sufficient to diagnose a patient with one of these conditions, but an extreme racist, Poussin says, likely suffers from delusions. Such people live with multiple symptoms, including paranoia. They are likely to project negative traits or outcomes onto entire groups and sustain those beliefs even in the face of strong countervailing evidence. Many embrace conspiracy theories. Some may grow violent. In fact, Poussin argued in a 2002 Western Journal of Medicine article, the extreme racist often begins with verbal expression of antagonism, progresses to avoidance of members of disliked groups, then to active discrimination against them, to physical attack, and finally to extermination, lynchings, massacres, genocide. That fifth point on the scale, the acting out of extermination fantasies, is readily classifiable as delusional behavior. This is all Poussin in his 2002 article. Poussin was not the first person to raise the idea that extreme racism is itself a mental illness, but he was among those leading the call for the American Psychiatric Association, publishers of the DSM, to consider putting it in subsequent editions of the manual, which has a long history of evolving, often slowly, in response to research and norms. Research and norms. Interesting terms. When his op-ed ran, it seemed to Poussin people pounced. Interesting categorization here. In response to research and norms, the DSM has a long history of evolving. The most famous example of that is homosexuality. Now, there are less, overt or extreme examples. For instance, antisocial personality disorder used to be called moral insanity. We don't call it that anymore. Now it has a scientific name. It's antisocial personality disorder. Some of these things, their names evolve, symptoms are added or subtracted, or, there's a blend, there's an axis you go by. Homosexuality is one of those that changed in response to research and norms, as they said. Well, our research shows that, homosexuality isn't mental illness at all. It used to be, until I want to say like 1980. DSM listed homosexuality as a mental illness. But the norms changed. It became acceptable to be homosexual, and all of a sudden, the psychiatrist said, in that case, I guess it's not a mental illness. Who knew? Just like gender dysphoria. You are a man, you think you are a woman. That is clearly a mental illness. You have a penis, and you think you are female. You are so divorced from reality that you are absolutely delusional. You're clearly mentally ill. You really do need treatment of some sort, and not gender-affirming surgery. You need like psychiatric treatment on a massive scale if you have a penis and you think you are a woman. However, norms have changed. You're a cross-dresser, you have the right to use any bathroom you want. And that's going to snowball and snowball and snowball until we have doctors trying to chop off the genitals of 7-year-olds. Norms have changed. So homosexuality isn't a mental illness anymore. Neither is transgenderism or gender dysphoria or any of these other things that used to be mental illness. Now, racism is a mental illness. So maybe calling it a little too early. It's not actually in the DSM. That's the whole point of this article, is maybe we should put it in the DSM. Racists are really crazy. But, people chopping off their genitals because they think they're the opposite sex, that's not crazy. Racists, they're the ones that are crazy. Let's take their guns. You know who should have all the guns? The transsexual people. Heroes. Trailblazers. Some of his fellow black psychiatrists argued that such a diagnosis would unleash a wave of legal excuse-making, helping no one but the violent racists themselves. Poussin counters that other health diagnoses have yet, nearly 200 years after psychological concerns officially entered American courtrooms, to produce rafts of acquittals. And some clinicians and researchers argued that there are other ways of attacking racism besides treating it as an illness. Educational programs, diversity initiatives, policy changes. That's a point Poussin says he doesn't oppose, at least when it comes to everyday racism. Those steps can help racists to embrace repugnant ideas while remaining functional parts of society. But those aren't the people he's talking about. Racism negatively impacts public health. The American Psychiatric Association told Time in a statement. The American Psychiatric Association has been focusing on this in the DSM by identifying and addressing the impact of structural racism on the over- or underdiagnosis of mental disorders in certain ethno-racial groups. From time to time, we have received proposals to create a diagnosis of extreme racism, but they have not met the criteria identified for creating new disorders. kind of like when Twitter started and they would get the occasional, please take this down. Hey, this is hate speech. Hey, this is targeting a group for violence. Hey, you should take this down. And it just goes and goes and builds, and suddenly everybody's asking for these all the time. It used to be that Poussin was the odd man out, saying, hey, extreme racism leads down this trajectory. If we call it a mental illness and we can treat it, then maybe they'll stop killing people. Which, to be fair, if you're in Poussin's shoes, I mean, who can argue with that? You see this trajectory, it's a mental illness, we should treat that, people won't die. How could you argue with that? He used to be the odd man out. Now everybody's saying these people are insane. Racists are crazy. We need to make this a new disorder in the DSM. Well, the American Psychiatric Association is now telling everybody, yeah, we've had these calls for quite a while now. They just haven't met the criteria. But what it's not saying is it's going to meet the criteria. The way things are going right now, it is only a matter of time before racism becomes a new disorder in the DSM. What are we on? 5? DSM 5 now, I think? I'd say by 6, definitely by 7, racism will be a mental disorder. How they're going to weave that in, and anti-Semitism is, of course, going to go along with that. Nazism, white supremacy, whatever, they're going to label all that. And then they're going to weave it into the law. Because if you meet certain criteria for these certain delusions or these certain mental illnesses, red flag law, we've got to take your guns. Can't have you going around killing Semites or minorities. Just like we can't have you running around being a threat to others, being a threat to your community. It has nothing to do with politics. God, no. No. The DSM, it's scientific. We have criteria. You've been diagnosed by a doctor. Okay, this has nothing to do with your politics. You're mentally ill. You can't have guns. Like, what do you want? It's science. It's not about the Constitution anymore. To this day, Poussin believes that extreme racism is very likely its own disorder in need of study, possible diagnostic criteria, and evidence-based treatment, he told me in September from his home in Massachusetts. But after retiring about 2.5 years ago at the age of 86, he says he's too far out of the professional mix to continue to push for an extreme racism diagnosis. I asked Poussin what he thinks might have happened if extreme racism had become its own diagnosable condition listed in the DSM. Extreme racism might have been a topic on talk shows and a more frequent topic of news coverage, he says. With research and public information campaigns, the need for intervention could have been as clear as it is for heart attacks. The steps to do so as well known as CPR. We'd get away from treating it as if extreme racism is normative, Poussin says, like a cultural difference because America is a racist country. We have made it normative by not calling it what it is. Even people in general society, friends and relatives, and even the afflicted individual would recognize it as a disorder and say, I'm not all right. People who get swept up by anxiety and can't function, they don't think they are normal. They say, this is taking over my life. I need some help. A diagnosis clues the family to say, this person is really troubled, and we have to get them some help. So that's why we need to do this. We need to do this so that you know you're not all right. You're not all right. There's something wrong with you. Like an alcoholic knows, man, I'm not all right. I need to go to AA. Things just keep getting worse in my life. I have delusions. I have anxiety. I have all these things listed in the DSM. I'm not all right. I need help. And if they knew that, we'd prevent all these mass shootings in the south side of Chicago that are clearly born of racism. We're so over time. I am not going to be continuing Peaky Blinders tonight. We've got Mass in the morning. I'm going to go through the comments here. Greetings, Augustus from Orlando, Azalea Park, Florida Treasure says, Florida Treasure, if you are still listening here, why don't you email me? I'm in Orlando. We live in the same town, and you keep showing up on YouTube, and we've never spoken in person. Holler at your boy. InvictusPA@protonmail.com. And if you missed the intro to this program, please do not write me on social media. It is not private. You have no expectation of privacy. The government will intercept it. You know now that Twitter files are being released, not only that the government will intercept it, but that the employees have full access to it, which I've been telling everybody for years. That, and I don't check social media. Certainly not the messages. So please email me if you have a legal question. And the other thing is, this is our Saturday night party because we're going to change the format. I'm just going to hop in, do a Sticks style thing, Sticks Hex and Hammer. Just do like, hey, here's an article. We're going to talk about this today. 10 minutes, in and out. I'm back to work. You got things to do. You don't have to spend an hour, 15 minutes, hour and a half listening to me talk about all these things. So those are the two announcements. Mario Alejandro Montano was a YouTuber who was involuntarily committed, this says Thought Criminal here in the chat, to a mental institution twice, and he committed suicide in March 2020. Good grief. That's horrible. So that's probably relating to a conversation we were having earlier where I was saying you probably don't want to claim the insanity defense. You don't want to say I'm crazy and think you're going home, because you're not going home. You're going to a mental institution. So that's the sort of thing that happens. You have no rights. The doctors do what they want with you. They're rehabilitating you. You don't know when you're going back to court. It's whenever the doctor says. Florida Treasure says the news media will actually lighten up the photo of a swarthy predator of a heinous crime to make them look whiter or white. I've seen it done countless times. Yeah, we've all seen that done countless times. And it's amazing, because you remember Michael Moore? Whatever happened to Michael Moore? Probably up to no good somewhere. He made Bowling for Columbine. He made Fahrenheit 9/11. And one of those, I don't remember, it was 20 years ago, he was talking about the media's propensity to make everybody black. All crime is made by black people, even when they're white. They darken the skin tone. I don't know. I remember that being in his films. I was also like an 18-year-old kid, so I don't know. Maybe the media was doing that 20 years ago, and maybe it's reversed now. Who knows? But we have definitely seen what Florida Treasure is saying in our living memory, just in the past several years. B says, we as white women were taught from a young age, oh boy, we are getting banned from YouTube tonight. That's what this shit was about. This is full-on race conversation here. We as white women were taught from a young age that we are all the same, and we are one human race. If more white women and girls were made aware at a young age of the risks, violence, and abuse of dating and associating outside of their race, fewer would participate in such suicidal activities. That is B talking, that is not me. I'm just going to let that stand and keep going. Matt Madarov says Mr. Boston should be a textbook example of someone who is insane. I actually don't know who that is. Then Mr. Boston goes on to explain. He stabbed a person with a pin, Jason Bourne style, said the person whom he attacked with a pin was an alien. He's still locked up in a mental hospital. True. Oh, so that actually wasn't a crazy example that I came up with earlier. The people who are destroying you, psychiatrists, says B. Right. So he's been in 4 years. They just transferred him to the Worcester State Hospital. Bridgewater is where they sent the Boston bomber. Seen inside, so man, that's quite the saga, Mr. Boston. Happy Yule, says B, and a Merry Christmas to you as well, B. Every state has its own laws. Kratom is illegal in Florida, but it grows there. It's equal to cocoa when it's fresh. Okay, that's kind of a non sequitur, Mr. Boston. Can we outlaw making MK Ultra pasties? Patsies. I am pretty sure that's illegal under the Geneva Conventions and probably a whole bunch of other laws, Agatha. But who's going to prosecute it? That's always the question. That's always how politics and law will intersect forever. I actually went to a very interesting presentation. Was it yesterday? What day is it? Yeah, yesterday. With the Federal Bar Association, where I was watching a presentation by the judge about the international military tribunals, effectively modern, and talking about how this is going to happen in the Ukraine and Russia when the war is over. Anyway, he was very refreshing about politics and law, the intersection thereof, and he's saying, that's the nature of law. We force our position on the citizens. That's what law is. It is the use of force. And we try to approximate justice, but law is violence. Law is force. Law is the power that is imposing order and imposing its will and trying to approximate that justice. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure, maybe we haven't put it in that words, but I think brainwashing people and torturing them and making them into sleeper agents or whatever else MK Ultra was up to, I'm pretty sure that's illegal in every state, at least the tactics are. But what are you going to do about it, right? You have to fight for everything. This is one of my favorite stories about Rosa Parks. I love this story because it's so demonstrative of what you need to do to change the law, what the left is doing to change the law, and what the right thinks is beneath them, or they gotta, work at their jobs and spend time with their families and have time to do this. I don't know what it is that the right just cannot figure this out, but the left has got it, man, and they have for decades. And catch up, we're not even aware of it. People won't even admit this to themselves. But what Rosa Parks did, the narrative is this poor black lady was sitting in the front of the bus and she was told to move on back. Move to the back of the bus. This evil society, this evil system. This lady just tried to sit down and just got harangued out of nowhere. Just out of the blue. This evil white man and this evil white society in the South moving this black lady to the back of the bus. That's what we were all told in elementary school. In reality, Rosa Parks worked for the NAACP. She was riding buses all day for days, going all around town, sitting in the front of the bus, trying to get someone to tell her to move to the back of the bus. And as soon as they did, there's your lawsuit from the NAACP. It's set up. Every major lawsuit, think of Roe v. Wade, right? Her lawyers told her, no, your story's it's not really going to pop. It's not going to catch the attention. It's not going to, give us the moral imperative that we need to legalize abortion. No. You weren't just with some guy who knocked you up and you want to get abortion. No, you were gang raped. You don't even know who these people. You were viciously gang raped and a pregnancy resulted from it. That's how we're going to get abortion legalized. That's the story we're going to go with. And she did. And, decades later, she came out saying, yeah, the lawyers told me to say that. I was pressured into saying that. What was I going to do? That's how cases are made. Amazing how all these plaintiffs' cases, they have these groups of people just come together by magic. They just all happen to have the same lawyer. They all happen to be coordinating. Just amazing how those things happen. Well, maybe we'll talk about the sausage making behind the scenes a little more some other day. John Gordon Mead says, just more of Gramsci's long march through our institutions, 100%, subverting and undermining anything useful to us. How do I get in contact with you via email, asks B. It's my last name, Invictus, Invictus, the letters PA for Professional Association, at protonmail.com. Please, again, don't write on social media. Joe Biggs, it would be awesome to get a show with third position personalities who have a passion with law and discuss various topics, aka you and Chris Cantwell and a few others. Chris Cantwell is out of prison, ladies and gentlemen. How about that? A new day. A new day. I'm very happy to see when inmates are given a second chance, when they're released and they can start their new life. Awesome. And I say that as a criminal defense lawyer, certainly not as a supporter of any extreme racism. But very glad to see Mr. Cantwell back on his feet, out of prison, hopefully doing well. So, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to switch to the new format hopefully this coming week. Hope you all had a great Saturday Night Live program, and we will catch you then. Good night.